Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Expana's Tuesday morning market roundup. Today is Tuesday, July 23rd. Hope your day is treating you well so far. Today, we are very fortunate to have with us Courtney, who's going to spend a little bit of time discussing the cattle on feed report that was just recently released. And she will be followed up by Ryan, who's going to talk a little bit about the contra-seasonal activity in the egg market. But for now, we'll bring it back to Courtney. Courtney, good morning. Always a pleasure. Hope you're doing well today.
Good morning, Russ. Doing just fine, thanks, and I hope you are too. That recently released cattle on feed report was highly anticipated by market participants, and it ended up being mostly in line with trade expectations. This here is a chart for the total number of USDA cattle on feed as of July 1st. And as we can see, on feed levels have generally been above year-ago levels throughout 2024 so far. And that was the case again in the latest report. The USDA reported about 11.3 million head total on feed as of July 1st, but that was just fractionally higher than a year ago. So not a huge year-over-year increase. The big one that was being closely watched was the number of placements in June. There was a sharp year-over-year uptick. The previous report, up about 4% year-over-year. We actually saw quite a big drop year-over-year in the latest report as of June 1st at about 1.6 million head. So this was viewed as supportive for the live cattle contracts when futures resumed trading yesterday. And in fact, we did see both live cattle and feeder futures close higher across the board yesterday. Another figure they released is the total number of cattle marketed or the number of cattle sent to slaughter. And that was a very sharp drop year over year at about 1.8 million head. But something that's really important to consider is that we had two fewer work days in June this year compared to June 2023. So that really skewed that total marketings figure. Going forward, there's a lot to monitor now that we are in the dog days of summer. So along with those on-feed totals, traders are closely monitoring those wholesale values. The dog days of summer typically slow meat demand in general, and we have seen that cutout start to soften recently. So all eyes will be on how those wholesale values trend going forward. And I just wanted to pull up those live cattle futures. We did see that slightly higher close yesterday at about $183 per hundredweight, and that is at a discount to the current cash market. So there's no shortage of factors to monitor in the weeks ahead.
And Courtney, as always, we appreciate your insight and we'll look forward to the next time that we have you on the Tuesday Market Roundup. And that brings us to Ryan Hochnowski. And Ryan, before we went on the air today, there were two things that stood out like a sore thumb during our discussion. And you used the expression supply driven, and then you mentioned the disease HPAI. And something tells me that what you're going to discuss, both those items are pretty germane to the current state of affairs. Good morning, Ryan.
Good morning, Russ. Yeah, absolutely. The market is absolutely being driven by HPAI right now, as it has been the better part of this year. And everything that is occurring in the summer is fairly contra-seasonal, and it's a supply-driven story. All right, so what you're taking a look at here is the number of egg layers on hand throughout the U.S. as reported by the USDA. As you can see by this little red dot, it's saying there's about 305 million. However, this was released prior to two recent HPAI cases, which puts us down to about 302 million, which is actually slightly below the 2022 figure, and as you can see, significantly below some of the other recent years here. So just the amount of birds on hand is just very, very limited right now. That could be made very evident by yesterday's egg inventory report that was released by the USDA. As you could see, nearly all categories were down week over week, except for breaking stock, though that's a little bit misleading because breaking stock is still trading at the high side of our ranges, even as early as this morning. The most notable data point here is that there's only 1.15 million cases on hand in the US right now. That is significantly lower than other recent years. We're talking hundreds of thousands of cases short of eggs, even though it's summertime, even though this is typically the time of year where egg demand is not, off the charts, it still puts the industry in a very, very tight position. So make no doubt about it, this is absolutely a supply-driven market right now. So I'm going to explain what's actually been going on now. So what you're taking a look at here is the white large cage-free California quote. Now, much of the cage-free that's on hand in this country will go to California, typically or other West Coast states. And as you could see, throughout June, we were at a very steady $3 per dozen level, which is fairly elevated to begin with on the wholesale market. What's super notable is that a lot of eggs at this point in time, prior to those HPAI cases that occurred recently, were getting down packed into conventional bids throughout the rest of the country because it just made sense for a lot of people at that point. But obviously, as you could see here, prices went nearly parabolic. What happened was, of course, you had the HPAI cases, which significantly impacted cage-free production. And right about at the same time, there was a couple of smaller features that popped up in California, but there was just a few market participants that ended up in a really short position and a bidding war ensued. And it was really interesting. Throughout the day, for multiple days in a row, bids were just climbing higher and higher and higher. And naturally, as you might expect, sellers sense that, they ask higher prices, and the market gets driven to significantly elevated levels, right? You're well above 2022 figures when HPAI was a major issue. And as of now, you're sitting at about $4.40 a dozen. And I could tell you, as of 9 a.m. Tuesday morning, we're taking calls already suggesting that the market is still firm today. So that's a very interesting data point right there. Now, if you listen to what I just said, a lot of eggs at this point were getting down packed into conventional bids. Now, when that isn't happening anymore, as products going to California for cage-free bids, there's less availability for the conventional market. So what does that do? That in turn supports the conventional market. And what you have right here is, again, similar to cage-free, a very elevated market compared to other recent years, right? You're sitting at about $2.64 per dozen. This only really competes with 2022, which was about 80 cents higher per dozen, and 2015, which isn't on the chart here, which was about even with this. Of course, all three of these years that I mentioned are major HPAI-ridden years. So with that said, I'll make two forward-looking statements here. As you can see, it's 264 a dozen. We're typically at the low point in the summertime. However, back to school demand typically starts about a week from now and ramps up through August. And it happens every year in the egg industry. We're already hearing of reports of pretty good potential, back to school demand here. So that should give some support to an already very tight market. Now, the most important point that I want to mention here is while we're at about 302 million layers in this country, the industry absolutely has the ability to get back to 320 or 330 million layers by the time we get to Thanksgiving and Christmas time, which of course is the peak demand period each year for eggs. The X factor is of course HPAI, right? Historically, we don't see much of it in the summer. This year, we absolutely are seeing it during the warmer weather months, right? As anybody in the egg industry knows, or really in any protein industry, there's been a major heat wave across the U.S., right, over the better part of the last few weeks here. Yet we're still seeing AI, which is typically, historically could be called, a colder or cooler weather disease. So, anything can really happen here now throughout the end of the year, but of course the major X factor will be HPAI, and if egg producers in the U.S. can get that number back up to the 320 or 330 million layer figure that we typically expect to see in the cooler weather months.
And thank you, Ryan. It will be interesting to see as we get closer and closer to August whether that historical trend that we anticipate with back to school comes into play. Great job of cause and effect. I'm sure our audience appreciates that education. And thanks to all of you for watching today. Today has been Expana's Tuesday morning market roundup for July the 23rd. We all hope that you have a great day, and thanks for tuning in.